right, welcome everyone to the Peer Allies at Work webinar. I always like to start off with a quote, so here we go. I could walk a mile in your shoes, but I already know that they're just as uncomfortable as mine. Let's walk next to each other instead, which is really the spirit of peer support. Welcome everybody. For those of you I don't know, I am Sally Spencer-Thomas. I'm a psychologist by training and got moved to participate in suicide prevention after I lost my brother to suicide in 2004. And I learned so much after his death in our acute grief, searching for answers, as many families do. And one of the things that I learned was that the majority of people who die by suicide have one attempt and it's fatal, and often have never stepped foot in any type of mental health resource. So where are they showing up? They're showing up at work. They were probably working, or they were just working. The workplace is arguably one of the most cross-cutting systems we have, and one of the least prepared. So that has led us into an area to try to fix that gap. And so I co-chair with Dr. Jody Jacobson-Fry, the Workplace Suicide Prevention and Postvention Committee. And I also co-chair with Jorgen Galustrup from Australia, the International Special Interest Group for Workplace. And before that, I was the executive secretary for the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, where we put together the task force that eventually led to the development of the National Guidelines for Workplace Suicide Prevention. And with me, I have my partner in crime, Eduardo Vega.
Hi there, I'm CEO of Humanivations, a company I formed after many years working in mental health and suicide prevention, both as an advocate, as a program developer, and as an executive in both nonprofit and in government, including as a state commissioner. I'm a person who lives with a mental health condition and also personally experienced suicide attempts, and that's been a lot of what I've tried to bring into our work together, creating solutions at the intersection of peer support, mental health, and suicide prevention through my company, Humanivations. You can learn more about us, and we will post information later on as well.
Great. So we're going to do some polling to help keep this interactive. And to that end, you can either scan the QR code, or you can grab this link that I just put in the poll, the polleverywhere.com, Sally Spencer Thomas 404 link. Or if neither of those work for you, you can type in the bit.ly link, Peer Allies at Workplace. Just make sure to capitalize the P, the A, and the W. And we'll go on to the first poll, which is, how have the issues of suicide, substance abuse, or mental health shown up in your life? And you should be able to click as many as apply here. So we're going to let this run for a little bit.
So we like to have these sessions, even though it's a webinar, be as interactive as possible. And part of it's about giving you the opportunity to think about some of these issues, but also just to kind of prime our thinkers about how this work is relevant to what we do, how we have participated, etc. So let's make sure, Sally, we got the poll everywhere posted, right?
Yeah, can you not see it?
Let me see.
I see it from where I sit.
Oh, okay.
It's on the screen.
Oh, I see. It's not refreshing right now, so. Are people?
Yeah, so people are slowing down. So we have about a quarter of folks have been that support person for people who are fighting through addictions and suicidal intensity and other mental health challenges. We've got about 1 in 5 of you have lost a loved one, a friend or family member, to suicide, and many other ways that we have lived experience. Interestingly, not one of you said these issues have not shown up in my life at all. So as a takeaway number one, this is how we get the conversation going in the workplace. Maybe people aren't so feeling psychologically safe enough to raise their hand and say, I've experienced these things in public of their peers, but in anonymous and confidential polls, very consistently everywhere we go in all kinds of different industries, sizes of companies, public, private, nonprofit sectors, we often find anywhere between 90 to 100%, as we have here, people saying, this is true for me. And so that's how we start the conversation about how our lived experience informs our ability to support our peers, and why peers are often trustworthy confidants for how to navigate our healing journeys, because many people have walked the shoes. We just don't know this about each other. Is there anything you'd like to add, Eduardo?
Yes. So I think that the point is that kind of around the world, everybody knows that, a good friend who knows how to listen and can be there and not judge you is a crucial support. And anytime you're experiencing stress or distress, whether or not that's identified with a specific mental health issue, or a life transition, or a struggle of a different sort. Now, a lot of times, what we want to do is kind of help develop and refine that, and also, create opportunities to take that to the next level with, structured training and program development related to peer support, as we have in many sectors. The crucial part of this is being a peer doesn't necessarily mean that you share everything in common, but you share some things. And if you're willing to share the journey, and that includes sometimes sharing struggle, what we call sharing strength and struggle, then you can show up for people, even at really tough times, in a unique way as a peer supporter.
All right. So we're going to bring in some storytelling into this webinar so you can see what things look like in real life. This is my colleague and friend, Juan Vigil, and he is a captain with the Denver Fire Department. And I met Juan in the summer of 2013, about 4 or 5 months after the Denver Fire Department lost a beloved leader, Captain Steve Magana, who died by suicide on Super Bowl Sunday, so that February. And Juan and his other firefighters got fire in the belly and didn't stop until they found a pathway forward, which landed them in our office. And they were still acutely grieving. And what they decided was going to be most impactful was to bolster their already existing peer support program, to deliver trainings related to applying peer support to suicide prevention. Now, this was a new approach for the Denver Fire Department, whose peer support program was initially set up only to address post-critical incident, like a really bad fire that they had responded to, or some other type of major trauma that they were exposed to. And so learning to use their peer support skills in this way around mental health and around despair and distress from non-fire department related issues was a new approach. And Juan and his colleagues had incredible success in creating safe spaces for firefighters to talk about their emotional challenges and even suicidal thoughts, and get them on a pathway to into resources or into just resolving those issues at the peer level. So we're going to go through a couple of goals today. One is we're going to examine the problems that we have in workplace mental health and well-being currently, and make the case for why suicide peer support is a gap-filling program. We're going to then define what peer allyship mean in a workplace context, and we're going to give you some vision forward on what peer allies at work look like. All right, so to start off with the problems, there's several here. So number one, it's no mystery that many workforces, doesn't matter what industry you're in, are experiencing high levels of despair and distress. This is the distress curve published by SAMHSA, and it was actually created before the pandemic, as they started to notice patterns related to what communities were going through after large-scale disasters. And so think about 9/11, for example, think about Katrina. That's where they developed this. But then when the pandemic came along, it also looked like a lot of this applied to the pandemic experienced by many communities as well. So in the pre-disaster phase, this is like February 2020, we saw something come in. We didn't know exactly what it all meant, but we got weird and we started hoarding toilet paper and we didn't know why, and standing in line in Costco for days and we didn't know why. But then impact, right? We can probably all remember the moment that we knew like this was serious. I remember it was the moment that Italy shut down for me. And I happened to be on a training in Long Beach, California, doing peer support work with the Sheet Metal Air Rail Transportation Unit. And like when we got there, we were like, oh, bumping elbows, going, oh, we're going to have a pandemic, yeah, whatever. And then Italy shut down. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here. So I went to the Long Beach airport and it was like a ghost town. And I got on my huge Southwest flight and there were 3 other passengers, me and 3 other people on a full, huge airplane. And the guy in front of me, four rows in front of me, coughed the whole way back to Denver. And I thought, that's it, I'm a goner. Of course, we didn't know very much in those early days, but we did have often an experience of pulling together, which is sometimes what we see in the immediate aftermath of a large scale disaster. People pull together and really do try to help each other out despite other differences they may have. So I don't know if it's true where you are, but here in Colorado, we were howling out the window at 8 o'clock every night in support of our essential workers and first responders. People were making masks for each other. People were delivering food to people who were shut in. And then boom, right? Around end of May, George Floyd's murder and all the social unrest sent us into a free fall of despair and distress. And it seemed to go on forever, with maybe some glimpses of hope of maybe the vaccine changing things or somehow getting back to a new normal. But it has been too much, too ugly, too long, and too jarring for our workplaces, not that almost every single workplace on the planet experienced high levels of distress and despair. And this became a top of mind conversation everywhere. Eduardo, you want to share these quotes?
We see these quotes here. Stress in pandemic times is like all the stress of work, life, parenting, smashed together all day, every day. And I don't know who to talk to since everyone else is just as stressed or worried and no one wants to lose their jobs. We've hit in times of a lot of stress, people in different types of organizations, are also conflicted themselves. And this is, I think, what we're sort of challenged to remedy, where people feel like they don't know what they can say, who they could say it to, at the risk of perhaps their employment or something like that. And so this is one of the big changes that we're seeing over the world in general, is that, particularly in different corporate settings, there's a lot more acceptance and encouragement of people, talking about mental health, talking about their coping, and when they're having struggles. However, it's still the case that a lot of places, it isn't necessarily known, what's safe to talk about, what you might want to talk about with your supervisor, and then also, what is who is the right person that you could connect with. So, with pandemic, changes, I think that there's still a lot of uncertainty in the world, and right now we're seeing a high level of stress all over the whole population, and in particular in the workforce and industry as well.
Yeah. So we know most everybody experienced some level of the distressed side of the stress curve. And it causes a lot of impact on an organization. And we in the United States are more stressed out than other cultures and countries that are similar to us. We're about 20% higher than the world average in terms of our stress rates. Add to that one of the major stressors is that the relationship between worker and supervisor is often very strained, and that ineffective communication is largely driving that strain. And then add to that the fact that most workers are not reaching out, even though they could benefit from some kind of support. And when they do, only 40% will talk to their employer because they feel unsafe. And when they do reach out and say, hey, I need help, only 40% of them are given any type of support. So this is a huge gap that we're trying to fill. Number two priority is that when we have benefits in our workplaces, often there's very low engagement. So the National Business Group on Health found out that the median EAP utilization was only 5.5%. Eduardo and I and our companies work a lot in male-dominated industries that have really started to take steps forward in building out a comprehensive suicide prevention and mental health promotion program. And in those male-dominated industries like construction, oil and gas, first responders, and so on, we see even less than 5.5% utilization. Usually we're in the 2 or 3% range, which of course is very frustrating for employers who are paying all this money for a benefit that people aren't engaging. And so they throw their hands up and wonder why. And then problem number three is that poor mental health impacts our business in the business sense. So we'll go to the next poll, and here talk about what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing in implementing a comprehensive mental health initiative at work. So this might be your benefits. It might be trainings that you're trying to put on. It might be awareness programs and other types of educational events that you're trying to hold. What have been some of the biggest challenges in implementing a mental health initiative at work? And here, this is going to be a vote up poll. So as they come through, if you think that it's a very relevant type of issue, you can go ahead and click the thumbs up, and the popular ones will rise to the top.
So Sally, are we supposed to be seeing the results coming in?
Yes. So you're not, because I see it on my end. I don't. Yeah. You don't. Do you see it now? Worries about liability for the employer?
No. No.
HR has an EAP period. Okay. Let me, don't know why that's not working. So let me try something else.
Yeah, it didn't work on the prior one either. So.
Well, that's stinky. Okay. So let me try this. How about now?
There you go.
Okay. So what have been the biggest challenges in implementing a mental health initiative at work? Adoption of resources, buy-in, includes everything: training, education, awareness. HR has an EAP, period. We've checked the box. We've done the thing. Worries about liability for the employer. We don't want to let people think that they're therapists and then maybe overstep their bounds and get us into a whole heap of trouble. These are common challenges. So yeah, go ahead and vote them up. Add any additional challenges that you might see. Discomfort, stigma.
I'm glad people added that one. And sometimes it's important to recognize that the challenges here, stigma and discomfort, are not just about whether or not people are comfortable with the issues related to mental health, related to substance use, etc., but whether they're comfortable or understand sort of how to respond to that, how to support folks within a work environment, whether it's one of your direct reports as a supervisor or a colleague or somebody else. What is safe, what's okay, what's ideal, or even what's sort of legal within a workplace context. These are very real issues.
So we have some things about privacy. I'm afraid that if I disclose, my information will be shared within the workplace and may be used against me, that kind of thing. ROI, have we demonstrated an ROI in investing in mental health here? Do people feel like it has value?
Yeah, I'm glad somebody pointed that out, because for a long time it seemed pretty clear that there wasn't associated with we didn't have a association with value or return on investment. But more and more companies have really started to recognize in the recent era how important and how valuable it is to invest in resources and that support their employees. We do another talk that specifically about employer issues in mental health program implementation. And one of the things that comes up a lot is that people It's not necessarily that people don't want or employers don't want to invest, but they don't really know sort of how to target like investments and initiatives in a way that fits for their industry, and that makes sense without necessarily putting anybody in a bad position either legally or personally. So.
Right. And so sometimes they'll just grab the thing off the shelf and try to force fit it into an organization where it's not really a good cultural fit. So here's the other poll that we did, just so you see it. The 100% of people saying, yes, this has shown up in my life in some way. And
Nice.
then here we are. We've got a couple others. The money issue is another one. Sign of weakness. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. All right. So the other issue is that when it's unaddressed, it shows up in all kinds of places. When untreated or undertreated or unaddressed mental health issues or suicidal intensity goes on, you're going to have challenges with employee engagement. They're either not going to show up to work, or they're going to show up to work and not be able to get the job done because they're either distracted or exhausted. And we're seeing a lot of turnover. I talked to a lot of employers to say that the churn of the employee base or the challenges recruiting and retaining, especially young talent, is a huge pain point for people. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that employees don't feel like their whole self is being valued or respected at work. And after the pandemic, we all realized life is too short to suffer in those ways. As Eduardo was alluding to, there's also legal issues potentially for workplaces that don't do this work in a sensitive and way that protects human rights. When we don't address mental health issues properly, you can have grounds for discrimination claims and Americans with Disabilities Act. And then, of course, unaddressed mental health issues also drive healthcare costs for employers. Many of the major healthcare costs are driven by stress-related illnesses like heart disease and blood pressure and so forth, as well as medical leaves that people need to try to get back on their feet. So a lot of this makes the argument for proactive intervention and prevention activities. So I'm going to turn it over to Eduardo to help talk us through some solutions.
So the solution we're going to talk about today is peer support, and particularly what we call sort of peer ally programs. But to kind of get you on your feet here as to where peer support fits and what it sort of is and isn't, let's talk about it as, in a certain sense, one of the most fundamental forms of help, across the world and across history, as we all know. Mothers, have supported other mothers in childbirth. People help each other with problems that they're sharing. Am I able to advance these things now? Or all right. So there's this informal level of peer support that helps with, where somebody, comes over to help you replace, your alternator or something like that. There's also a kind of informal support that happens around the workplace, maybe in the break room. People are doing break rooms a little bit less now, but still happy hours, something like that. People want to talk about stress at work, something else. They connect with other employees. There is structured peer support, and some people are familiar with things like 12-step programs, like Alcoholics Anonymous, etc., in which people are getting together in a structured way, sometimes within a meeting format, to support each other in recovery or start to support each other in a particular issue that they're experiencing as individuals. There's also peer support groups that are structured with sometimes with a facilitator or a trained clinician or something like that. And then there are a lot of different kinds of structured peer supports around people's experiencing particular challenges in life, and that could be something including people living with cancer, foster youth, etc. So many different kind of places that this shows up. Point to recognize is that sort of fundamentally we've got informal peer support, which happens every day all over the place. Now we've got structured and formal peer support that often is driven by a focus on a particular issue. Next slide.
All right, so back to the polling. What is one word that comes to mind when you hear the phrase peer support? And I think this is just a scrolling poll. So as you put, oh no, it's a word cloud. One word. So if you can't think of one word, but maybe you have 2 or 3 words, you got to connect your words with a dash or a underscore so that your phrase sticks together. So what's a word or a short phrase that comes to mind when you hear the phrase peer support? Great. Community. Relatable. Connection. Friends. Understanding. Teamwork. Safe. Reliable. Not alone. Judgment. All right, slowing down here. No judgment. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Back to you.
Well, yeah, I was glad to see the poll, and I was interested to see if some of the things that we put kind of think of as the fundamentals of peer support showed up. But I love, community as a focus, non-judgment. The biggest sort of a benefit of peer support or a peer ally type program really is about this ability of individuals to connect on the level of equals. So the 2 fundamentals of peer alliance, we say, are equality and shared experience in some fashion. In this way, we're actually sort of referencing here the collaborative nature of construction, but depending on the sector that you work in, people already have collaborative relationships most of the time among peers. So, if there's a thinking about, how do we make this place safe? How do we work together in a way that enables us to succeed, whether it's with a sort of a physical safety mindset like we have in construction, or it's a more of a general sort of psychological safety, or ideally, something like, employee wellness. Like we all want to work here. One of the sort of the employer frames for this kind of culture of mutual benefit and mutual support goes to things like, happy places to work and best places to work. What are associated with those? Peer support benefits people because it actually has this specific ability to reduce isolation too. Sometimes, but not always. Sometimes people don't feel as connected to a mental health provider as they would a peer. And as an example, if you're receiving a service from a psychiatrist or something like that, it might be very helpful, but it may not reduce your sense of isolation in the way that it does when you talk with somebody, you connect with somebody who's kind of on your same level, who's gone through some of the same things. So this aspect of reducing isolation is really important, particularly when we talk about things like suicidal intensity. And then finally, peer support, and then in this case we're talking about specifically peer support structured programs, have this helper effect where it engages people in a new way in their work life, in their work community, in the culture. So the helper effect is the positive effect that we get when we support others, when we do things that make us feel good. So that actually ends up that people who are providing peer support or peer allies, as an example, get this additional benefit of personal connection, a sense of meaning, and also a lot of times engagement and a new kind of commitment to their workplace, to their community of employment, etc.
All right. So now we're asking you to draw upon your own lived experience and think about how you might have personally benefited from peer support. Give examples, specific examples as you feel able or comfortable about how you personally benefited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, in this, just to clarify, going back to the informal or formal, like you don't have to necessarily have had a formal peer support experience, but support of your peers, how has it benefited you in your life?
Well, as people are putting their pieces in, I think back to a time where I was experiencing a pretty significant depression. I was pretty disabled by it. I was very distracted, not sleeping, feeling very hopeless, feeling like a big failure. And I went to our professional association meeting, just kind of dragging myself there. I didn't want to be there. And I had all kinds of responsibilities, and it just felt like the weight of the world. And my peers at the time just come alongside me and said, you can fail at everything, Sally. You can, leave this whole community. We're still going to love you. We're still going to stand by you. And for me in that moment, that meant so much to have their support and offer to, help me through that very difficult time. Pulled in advance. All right.
The pool did not advance, you said?
That's what Larry said. So
All right. You're
here we go.
showing us your
I know.
backend here. Let's see. I'm learning something as well. How do we do it?
So I see. How about now?
Um, so we're going to talk in a minute about sort of the difference between peer support in the most general sense, and specifically the development of a peer ally program, what we call peer ally program, within an organizational setting, and sort of help you think about sort of what the advantages of that are, and also how we can start developing this resource on a structured level. So it doesn't have to be highly structured, but there's a lot of opportunities that many employers that we work with are already developing, and others that we're helping to kind of get on their feet and help people move from thinking about, well, what is this peer support? How might it fit with our company? To how do we actually make that happen? And what are the best practices for that?
All right. Well, I don't know why this poll isn't working. Poll everywhere sometimes gets gremlins, but if you want to add your examples into the chat, we can also see them there.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, how have you benefited from peer support? I'm not sure that the chat's open to everybody now, but we can surface those later and promote them through the webinar. So
should be open. I've seen some people come in through the chat, but we can go forward.
All right. So we started talking about peer supporters, and we're working on this alternative language, peer ally, because peer supporter sounds like it could be confusing to people too. But we want to ask, so what is a peer supporter? What does a peer ally do that makes them so effective and so powerful and impactful in other people's coping and day to day? So the one thing that they do really is care for this compassionate relationship. So a peer support relationship, a peer allyship, as we call it, is a special kind of relationship, and it's based on equality, and it's based on shared experience of some sort. So peer supporter creates that space, fosters it, and cares for that unique kind of peer alliance relationship. Next slide, or next. They really are effective in listening, and as a lot of people know, there's different types of listening. You may have been exposed to what's called active listening. We like to think about training people in deep listening, which is kind of connecting to the root of people's journey and their struggle, and in this from the point of view of compassionate curiosity. Next slide. Great peer allies to seek to understand better, to get closer to what a peer is experiencing, not to judge them or diagnose them. And it is important to recognize, we clarify here, that although When we train peer allies, as an example, Sally and or I, we do include mental health literacy in that. But we are not about training people, and we don't actually think that it's right to expect people to be in the position of creating or determining some psychodiagnosis or something like that. It's really about how do we get together with a person. A peer ally explores solutions and resources available to others. And part of this is because the fundamental values of peer support are about understanding that ultimately people know more about their situation. They sometimes know the best resources available to them. So a peer ally, it's important to know, is not a service provider, not necessarily a resource provider, but somebody that can walk along with you when you're having a hard time. Look at and maybe explore things that could work to help you get through today better, or get through your current situation. Next time. Really important, and this is surprisingly challenging. A peer ally sits with questions and discomfort. That's to say, sometimes individuals want to have an inclination to sort of solve other people's problems. Or it's an inclination that comes up on us, is this desire to fix the situation, or not let our peer sort of suffer more, so to speak. But a peer ally really needs to be able to be there and kind of be in that space. Recognize that right now this situation might not have an easy solution. We're going to be there, and we're going to explore questions, not necessarily find answers at the moment. Next slide. Important what great peer allies do not do. Again, kind of getting to this point, is they don't fix other people's problems. And there's all sorts of reasons that kind of moving in the direction of solving other people's problems ends up creating challenges for the individual. But similarly, they don't judge or debate a person, this sort of thing. It does happen, but in general, as an example, in our trainings, we try to really discourage people from playing devil's advocate, where maybe Sally says, oh, this person said this thing to me, and it really hurt me, and I thought that they were really off base. Some people might say, well, maybe she had some insight that you didn't have, or something like that. Right? Play devil's advocate. We don't want to do that. We want to stay with our peer throughout that. We don't want to cross ethical lines. Really important. And of course, being a peer supporter is a little closer to being a good buddy, a good pal. On the other hand, when you're providing peer support, when you're a peer ally through a structured program, you've got to be really careful about these things. And of course, peer allies do not provide psychotherapy. Really important. Sometimes people don't really understand the difference between what we call the therapy zone and the support zone, the peer support zone. So getting a handle on what that is, making sure that you're kind of not getting into mucky waters that you're not skilled for, trained to, or most importantly, that aren't really appropriate to kind of a peer support conversation. Doesn't mean we don't talk about hard things. It means that we don't really put ourselves in the position of doing something that would involve a long-term process with regard to healing trauma or this kind of thing. And we don't give advice. So we talk about the vice of advice. Giving people advice not only disempowers them and disempowers our ally, our peer, but it can also put us in a bad position where maybe we say, oh yeah, you should move out of your mom's house, right? And then the person does that, and things don't work out. Many reasons that we would advise not to give advice.
So Eduardo, you have distinguished a great peer supporter from a buddy out of the buddy zone, and also not psychotherapy, out of the therapy zone. Could you also just say a thing or two on how a peer ally at work is different from a peer specialist? I think maybe some folks on the webinar might also have some awareness of a role of a peer specialist.
Sure, and so it gets to the design program issue when you're talking about different types of peer support programs, peer ally programs. Sort of from my framework, everybody who provides peer supporters trained to do that is a kind of is a peer ally. There are particularly specialized individuals, mostly in the mental health field, called peer specialists, who have gone through extensive training related often to a specific type of experience, maybe within a mental health setting or something like that, and who sort of have a full-time job of providing peer support at this, highly specialized, highly trained level. That's different from being a peer ally, which we say, anybody can be, and most people are already to some degree. And we also use this word, sort of peer supporter, kind of in the mix to sort of reference the fact that it's a support relationship, but it isn't necessarily a service, right? So anybody can be a peer ally. A peer specialist provides a service, a peer support service, and peer support is the kind of the world in which it all happens, so to speak. Now, if you're considering an agency level, within your workplace or with a special team, the development of a peer ally program, a peer support program, we want you to think about a few things. There's, first of all, I think we see these as a really important, very viable resource for almost any organization, because it doesn't necessarily involve a high level of training. It doesn't involve a high level of investment. It's really about people. Now, on the other hand, when you're going to start a program out, there's some things you're going to be thinking about, and we get into these more in our mini clinics, etc. But you want to, of course, think about how does this program that we're going to develop fit with our culture or as an organization. How are we going to get the right people in the mix here? How do we recruit people who could be peer allies? What training should they get? What should they know about? What do we need to know about as an organization? Will people who sort of are peer allies, who are the sort of the human resource of the peer ally program, will they receive compensation in some fashion or another? And there's many different approaches to that. And then as far as values go and things like that, also for the organizational level, are there things that we need to be concerned about, or what things should we be thinking about with regard to important kind of bright lines related to employee rights, confidentiality, and safety, in the case that an emergency were to occur or something like that. Now, the biggest thing, because being a peer ally is about people, and you're thinking about how to create a peer ally program, we want to just kind of give you a couple of highlights in terms of like the essence of people who become good peer allies, are really about a few qualifications. So when you're thinking about, I like to have develop a program and I like to recruit some people, we want people to come to the mix of this who have some lived experience of their own. That's actually a really crucial and exceptionally valuable. As an example, if you're in a workplace and somebody's managed some struggles with substance abuse addiction or substance addiction, and they can be there for others to share that lived experience of that journey, that's really powerful. Everybody shares some lived experience of struggle. That's part of what makes us human. But also, we really want people that have this kind of fundamental compassion and an interest in what other people are going on. So we talk about curiosity and compassion. People who want to give back to their community, and want to help others. And also who are people who are courageous, who aren't afraid to talk about difficult issues and things like that. So there are a lot of people out there.
So I wanted to share just a couple of case examples. So I already shared the firefighter example with the Denver Fire Department in one, and a lot of our large municipal departments within the first responder community, both law enforcement and fire service, have had some form of a peer support program, sometimes going on for decades. So there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from some of those larger departments. I also saw Larry Berkowitz on the call today, and we got a chance to, both Eduardo and I got a chance to participate in a peer support program that Massachusetts did in supporting crisis workers during the pandemic. And so that was interesting because these mental health providers really struggled with the idea of peer support and how they could not get themselves into the therapy zone. So we're learning all the time as these new models are emerging. This is another model that I wanted to share with you that is involved in the field of construction. So this organization is called Veterans in Piping. It's a special program within the United Association of Pipe Fitters and Plumbers. And their task is to help transitioning active military develop a trade, that of plumbing and pipe fitting, as they transition into civilian life. So right out of the gate, I would say that that is suicide prevention work, because they're making sure that these transitioning service members have a good place to land once they get out of the military, that they have a job that's going to help them settle into their new life. But this organization provided us with a unique opportunity for peer support. Each of the folks down below in that picture oversee a VIP program on a camp or a base somewhere in the United States, and they're training these active military folks, and they were noticing that many of them were struggling. They'd even lost a couple of people over the years, and so they wanted to develop peer support skills so that they could better support these students of theirs, these trainees. And so Eduardo and I have been working with them now for a year and a half, and it has just been the coolest thing. We started off by gathering folks and really helping to find what they wanted this peer support program to look like, establishing that vision, setting expectations for the job description. We did that collaboratively, so they were co-designing it from the beginning and really felt like it was by, about, and for them. And then as we moved through the year, each quarter, we would do some basic peer support training skills, as well as helping them with basic mental health literacy. And again, to Eduardo's point, we're not teaching them about diagnoses, but really more of the experience of trauma, the experience of living with addictive behaviors, the experience of having anxiety, and so forth. And as you can see, we cover a lot of ground over these quarterly trainings. They're usually a full day. And then on the off month, we have just a check-in session where we have them bring forward what we call their success stories and head scratchers, places where they're feeling like they're having a really big impact, and places where they might want to troubleshoot around some of the challenges that they might have. And I think we would both say with confidence that over this last year and a half, they have gained so much confidence and pride in this program. They are always coming forward with impact stories, where when we started, there was not a lot of confidence in their skills to listen empathically. There was lots of advice giving, and even some judgment around these things. We have a lot of trainers now who say, like, back 8 months, 12 months ago, I would have said, buck up, Buttercup, it's time to go to work. And now I spend a little bit more time listening to what's going on and seeing if we can get somebody through their difficult time. Eduardo, you want to say anything more about our VIP case study?
Well, I think that the thing that's really interesting in this is really we're talking about a group of men, obviously military and construction. So places where the culture is not necessarily receptive and certainly hasn't been historically, to people talking about emotions, talking about feelings, and this sort of thing. And so I think. When you are able to, engage people and bring them along, you see like a lot of change that's not just about the individuals kind of developing skills and competence, but that's really about culture change within an organization, and one that I think also we saw, fostered a lot of mutual respect and connection within the employees as well. So.
All right, so we have Larry chiming in on the chat. Yes, that was pretty unique approach, and shout out to Sarah Gare, who helped lead that whole effort in Massachusetts. And oftentimes the helpers don't necessarily think about how to help each other. They're so focused on serving the community, and in many ways, people in helping roles need peer support more than anybody, because we can get so depleted, and also exposure to things like compassion fatigue and secondary trauma and so on. So yeah, that was a pretty cool program to be a part of. And then in terms of the person asking about cost, just like many other programs, it varies. It varies to the degree that the size of the organization, for example, of the length of the program. If people just want to step a foot into it and just do a brief training around a peer support skill, for example, just one skill, that would have a very different footprint than what we did with UA VIP, which is really stand up a whole program. Also, we had an evaluation component to it as well. So that adds to that because we wanted to make sure that what we were doing was having the intended impact and not unintended consequences, and that people were able to demonstrate changes in knowledge and skills and so on. So it would very much vary depending on all of those variables.
Yes, and as an example, hopefully people will, sign up to join our mini clinic where we'll talk about sort of what the options are for early implementation. Whether you want to do a full scale program like this, whether you want to start with, a very much of a sort of fundamental peer ally community. There's a lot of different possibilities. We think that the great thing about peer support programs, about peer ally programs, is that they can really be customized, with not too much effort to the different types of many different types of organizations. The one thing I wanted to add, because I think it was such a salient example to me recently on one of our calls with one of our clients who's developing a program, was that they talked about how they had met with somebody they were supervising, and they were really concerned about performance. And in fact, actually, it seemed like the direction of the conversation was going to be around letting this person go, around separation. But when they used their skills, the skills that they gained, and they started to sort of look into and connect more on with the individual, they actually really that conversation really turned around. The individual not only started coming back to work, they became really positively engaged, and they were able to help the person sort of find a resource to get through what was a very big trouble spot in their personal life. So and this is an example of a really great, very fundamental employer-based outcome where there's a good chance that somebody that in a position would have to be replaced, etc. So at the Palliance Institute, we're working, with Sally and with many other companies to specifically, build an understanding and build a sort of a fund of knowledge related to development of peer alliance programs, peer ally programs, and peer support across multiple sectors. Sally and I have had the opportunity as partners to work in many sectors as well, and I think including technology and construction and police forces, as well as general community settings and community organizations of all sorts around the world. So we'll post links to the Palliance Institute, and you can get more contact information from us there as well. No questions in the Q&A now, but I mean, can we open it up if anybody wants to just make a comment or has a question to discuss? Are we able to let people talk in this format? It's a little slightly different.
Sure. If they raise their hand, I can do that. I'll say one of the things that's emerging now is that we're finding it's important for the peer support team to have a go-to mental health provider to answer any triage questions that they might have. And where that's landed us is that mental health providers in that role usually need to have a fairly deep level understanding about the culture. So for example, with the Denver Fire Department folks, they had a dedicated fire psychologist that they could turn to if they had questions about do we need to escalate this situation? Did I do the things I was needing to do? Do you have a suggestion for a resource? That kind of thing. In construction, one of the groups that's been at this for a while is the Sheet Metal Air Rail Transportation Union. And they have a dedicated person that they pay on retainer to answer some of these triage calls. They're only getting like 3 calls a month, so it's not a ton of work, but it gives them an extra level of feeling like they're supported, and that they are going to be able to navigate some of these issues and not have to do it on their own. There's a question here. When did the shift to respecting peer support begin?
That's a good question. I mean, it is. I think that there is a real mix of it. One of the things that was interesting to me was seeing people seeing a big change within police forces. I think where peer support has sort of existed formally and informally, within mental health, it was different. But when we started to see things like peer support groups and peer mentor programs set up in places like police forces and fire, as Sally talked about, that I think really was a big change because nobody can relate to the struggles that a police officer has, as an example, so much as another police officer. Similarly, in different communities where there might be community struggles of different sorts, we've seen people putting together formal groups and informal groups via Facebook and etc., where peer support, it really is the core component. Regardless of what that experience is, if the sort of struggle experience, is around racism, example, or around discrimination or a specific type of struggle, disorder, etc. Now more than ever, there are many, many ways in which people are accessing peer support, and I guess I'd have to just add that COVID, I think, really took that to the next level, because for a while that was the only way that we could support each other, right?
Yeah. I also think as this expands over time, we're going to have better research around it to demonstrate the impact. I always say Australia is a good decade ahead of us. They're also ahead of us in terms of the research around this. And if you look at the Mates in Construction case study, they were able to determine a very significant return on investment to the community for investing in workplace peer support. I have had some anecdotal level conversations across a number of sectors, air, rail, first responder, and construction, and they all independently told me that they estimate about 80% of worker distress was resolved at the peer level. So if you think about it, again, from an impact to the worker and the employer, that is amazing from a cost savings perspective, from a disruption to work life perspective. If we can resolve 80% of worker distress at the peer level, why wouldn't we do that? It seems like a really great way to fill that gap. So we just have a minute left, and we wanted to talk about next steps. We're going to be having a first steps into implementation clinic. If you're interested, I'm going to go ahead and drop the invitation into the chat. That's going to happen September 7th at 1 p.m. Pacific time and 4 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to just walk you through one of our tools to help you decide what kind of peer support program is the best fit for your culture and your organization, and get you rolling in that direction. Eduardo and I would also offer up a 30-minute discovery call if you wanted some specific coaching about what that might look like. We're happy to get that started. Okay, we've got another comment in the chat. Tracy just started with Associate Resource Group for Associates with Disability and Allies for a Global Company. Any cultural considerations around peer support? It seems like disabilities, mental or otherwise, are even more stigmatized in many countries. You want to take that, Eduardo?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it is fair to say that certainly a lot of the experience going back to the original kind of mental health peer support came from people with disabilities and people who were isolated as a result of their conditions. A lot of people who had experienced abuse or or mistreatment, from traditional service providers, as an example. So, there is informal peer support in a lot of different communities that I've worked in, and of course, within different disability communities. And on the other hand, I think there's a great opportunity to have peer ally dialogue, both within and extended across those. One of the things that we offer at Humanovations is, a 10-hour course that's for anybody, and that doesn't require any prior experience, but that gives people both knowledge and also specifically fundamental skills to take that peer support concept to the next level of becoming a peer ally. And we'd love to offer those, along with program development here with Sally, to anybody. So feel free to reach out, and we'd be glad to talk with you. That's an area I particularly would love to support your efforts in.
Great. So I'm just asking if that'll be recorded and shared. Probably. I think there's a good chance that we'll do that. And can you send the September Zoom invite via email to those who are on the call? Yes, Brandon, we will follow up with that. And then if everyone could put their 30-day action step, one thing that they might do differently in the next 30 days to either explore this idea of peer support or take an action step towards building a peer support program. And then finally, peer support is really about surrounding with yourself with the people who help you see the best in you. Thank you so much for everyone who came today. It was really great to have you here and start this real innovative conversation about how do we bring peer allyship to work. Hopefully our paths will cross again.
Thank you all.